Ladies and gentlemen, we'll call this hearing to order. We expect the arrival of some other senators soon when their conferences, lunches break up. But we welcome you all. Today, the Foreign Relations Committee is convened to discuss the crisis in Kosovo and its potential ramifications on stability throughout the region. Our first panel will consist of Ambassador Robert Gelbard, the Special Representative of the President and the Secretary of State for implementation of the Dayton Accords. After we hear from Ambassador Gelbard, the committee will welcome Mr. James Hooper from the Balkan Institute, Mr. John Fox of the Open Society Institute, and former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, who currently is the volunteer president of the Albanian American Civic League. I appreciate the willingness of all of our witnesses to appear before the committee this afternoon. I confess that I'm deeply concerned about the situation in Kosovo today. Since February of this year, approximately 150 people have been killed in a particularly appalling fashion. And the Serbian police have attacked and murdered innocent women and children in their effort to crack down on the Kosovar Albanian separatist movement. The Albanian community in Kosovo has shown remarkable reserve in their pursuit of the autonomy that was revoked in 1989 and 90. But as we have all seen, that patience has worn thin. The gathering strength of the Kosovo Liberation Army in their quest for an independent Kosovo and their violent tactics to achieve their goals leads me to believe that things in Kosovo may yet get even worse. The Serbs have shown in recent months that they are more than willing to use overwhelming force in response to separatist activity in Kosovo. And I do not expect that that attitude to change. I sincerely hope that our administration does not consider President Milosevic's role in the Bosnian peace process, however great or small, as justification for leniency with regard to his abhorrent behavior in Kosovo. The contact group established to coordinate policy on the conflict in the former Yugoslavia has met several times since the violence in Kosovo broke out in February. Despite statements of outrage and condemnation from the contact group, the Serbs have continually ignored its limited demands. President Milosevic thus far has successfully exploited the historical and economic interests in Serbia that shade the views of some of our friends in Europe. Though there are merits to using the contact group in dealing with the situation in Kosovo, at some point in the future the contact group proves to be unsuccessful at contributing to the resolution of the conflict. Then the United States must pursue an appropriate policy unilaterally. I realize the policy challenges facing the United States and the international community in responding to the Kosovo crisis. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has used strong words of warning to President Milosevic, but I must say the direction of the United States policy on this issue is unfortunately unclear. As I mentioned earlier, the contact group has been ineffective at forcing Mr. Milosevic to cease his terrorist tactics in Kosovo. Given the potential this conflict has to spread to the rest of the Balkans and beyond, even involving our NATO allies, Greece and Turkey, I think it is critical for the administration to clearly state its policy on this question. In December 1992, then President Bush delivered an unequivocal warning in a letter to President Milosevic that the United States was prepared to intervene militarily if Serbia attacked the ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. President Clinton repeated this so-called Christmas warning after he took office in 1993. It would serve the interests in furthering public debate on the issue if, Ambassador Gelbard, you will publicly state what this warning consists of and whether this will continue to be U.S. policy. I look forward to discussing these issues and other questions with all of our distinguished witnesses before us. So, Mr. Ambassador, we especially welcome you and invite your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
President, to apologize for sitting out another genocide on his watch, with the fourth Balkan War of this century raging and a fatally wounded NATO at the center of his international legacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congressman, welcome.
Nice to be here, Senator. I recall being here in this very position, facing you on, I guess it was February 1991, just over 7 years ago, when you were concerned, really concerned about what was going to happen to Yugoslavia. And I remember ending that testimony by saying that I didn't think that Yugoslavia was going to stay together. We're all hoping that it would. The United States was banking its foreign policy on it. And all we heard during that meeting was how Albanian terrorists and separatists and the quest for greater Albania was going to destroy Yugoslavia. And now we see what destroyed Yugoslavia, which was there all the time, the quest for greater Serbia. Slobodan Milosevic, when he walked in to Kosova in 1987 and brutally occupied it and took away its legitimate status as one of the 8 juridical units of the Confederal Republic of Yugoslavia, where Kosovo had an equal vote with Serbia. It rotated every year. Created, in less than a few years, not only apartheid, but a Warsaw Ghetto that still exists in the heart of Europe today. I wouldn't be concerned, Senator, about greater Albania. I'd be concerned that we've already legitimized ethnic cleansing by creating a phony republic called Srpska. It never existed. It's there. Why? Because Slobodan Milosevic wanted it. The person who in the news last Sunday is targeted by his former friend, Karadzic, in a book saying he's about to now go to Hague and he's going to turn state's evidence, and he's pointing the finger at his friend Slobodan Milosevic as the architect of some of the most brutal, unbelievable atrocities since the Nazi era. We don't have to worry about greater Albania. We have to worry about what I was worried about back in February of 1991. And at that time, I can only wave in front of you a Serbian version of this. I'm now going to give you the English translation. This is what Slobodan Milosevic has been weaned on. Here it is, The Expulsion of the Albanians, a paper presented by his mentor, a professor, former minister of the Yugoslav government, Vasil Tribilovic, in Belgrade, March 7, 1937. If you want to see what happened in Bosnia, what's happening in Kosovo today, read word for word, line by line, exactly what's going on, their MO, their modus operandi. Shelling villages, burning them down, getting rid of Albanians at all costs, because this is territory they want. He will not abandon this. And as we keep waffling in this body and in the State Department, he will just go and take more and more and more and more. He bluffed his way right through Bosnia, and he got Srpska. He's bluffing his way right now. He knows that there's no real resolve with this Christmas warning. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. Sorry to start before you walked in. But he sees and senses the waffling already. He sees strong words on the part of Madeleine Albright. Then Madeleine Albright is muffled by Sandy Berger. And then we have questions coming up in Gilman's hearing a few weeks ago about the Christmas warning, and a very lukewarm response by Ambassador Gelbard. We have to meet with you in executive session, and you heard it again today. No direct response. Don't you think Slobodan Milosevic is hearing those responses? Don't you think he's ready to do more and more because he sees that the greatest superpower in the world has lost its resolve, has a foreign policy which has abandoned the principles upon which this country was formed? Our foreign policy should be based on fundamental human rights. That's one of the key determinants of foreign policy. We have today in Kosova some of the most egregious examples of violations of those human rights. In fact, Senator Biden, during that hearing that you held, and it was a wonderful hearing, it was the first time that you got all groups together to talk about the problem, I had to fly in reports from the Council on Human Rights from Pristina and other places, litanies of horror. I don't have to do that today. You know why? All you have to do is read your own U.S. country report from the State Department. Here it is, the 1997 edition. But if you read the last 5 years, you can't believe the litany of horrors in here against the Albanian people of Kosova. What are we waiting for? How many people have been killed and brutally tortured and detained and disappeared? Every criteria they use has been violated. Why is there such a disconnect between those egregious violations and our professed adherence to human rights when it comes to foreign policy? Is there another deal in the wind? Perhaps you didn't ask the right questions to Ambassador Gelbard. Are we placating Russia for some reason? They're always there supporting their first cousins, the Serbs. That's where the Serbs came from in the 6th century AD, from the Ukraine. We know they're blood brothers, or at least blood cousins. They're always there supporting them. But what has Russia done for us in Iran, Iraq, and China, and so many other places? They don't support us. Why are we giving such deference to Russia? Why are we even considering a contact group at this point, including Russia? This is an issue that should be led by the United States of America in the NATO milieu, without Russia. This is where it belongs. That is what solved Bosnia. And the only reason today Bosnia is not like Kosova, Mr. Chairman and Senator, is that we have troops there. Who are we kidding? When are we going to wake up? Another key element of our foreign policy that's been abandoned is that we will do everything to preserve the security of a vital area like the Balkans in Europe. And if you look at international law and how it defines where you have a state of belligerency, you look at what the neighboring countries are saying about what's going on there. Every one of them is using language which is at the edge. Recently, the foreign minister of Greece said Kosovo is like a hand grenade. If it goes any further, it's going to explode. A Turkish spokesman for foreign policy said something similar. I have it right here someplace. Stated that the Kosovo crisis, if unchecked, could destabilize the Balkan region and therefore European security. NATO condemned the excessive use of force by the Yugoslav army in Kosovo and said that the North Atlantic Council is profoundly concerned about the deterioration of the situation there and was considering, quote, possible further means to maintaining stability in view of the risk of escalating the conflict in the region. On April 27th, a spokesman from the United States State Department said that if the contact group members did not agree to a new sanctions package, the United States would act unilaterally. The United States reiterated the UN and the contact group's call for the immediate withdrawal of the special police units, which are nothing more than the Yugoslav army from Kosovo, and the need for unconditional dialogue. And yet, when the contact group met in Rome on April 29th, the United States capitulated to a weak proposal for more sanctions under pressure, especially from Russia, which, as I said before, has gone out of its way not to support us in dealing with Iran, Iraq, China, and many other areas. It is obvious that the sanctions are not really an issue to Belgrade, which has already survived 6 years of very tough economic sanctions. In the meantime, how many Kosovar Albanians have to be killed? We talk about negotiations. We talk about so many things. No conditions. But when do we get to the point where we say, hey, thousands of Albanians are being killed? Are these negotiations working? Should we now learn from the experience we had in Bosnia that Slobodan Milosevic only understands one thing, and that's the use of force or the threat thereof? In the meantime, they will only serve these sanctions will only serve to bolster nationalistic fervor on Mr. Milosevic's behalf. Only resolve will work, Mr. Chairman, and that will have to come from the only superpower left in the world, the United States of America, taking the lead with our NATO allies. In conclusion, the 2 million ethnic Albanians of Kosova, who comprise more than 90% of the population there, have no human, economic, or political rights of any kind. Slobodan Milosevic has illegally and brutally occupied Kosova.
Senator, I think that the only way to, there's a lot of dissension now within NATO, and I think that's because the United States, the Clinton administration, has been unwilling to exercise proper leadership on this issue. What I think we are advocating, what Congressman DioGuardi is advocating, is conflict prevention, the kind of military measures that are credible enough to prevent the kind of conflict that will require even greater military measures, greater risks, greater burdens, or more disastrous consequences if we don't react.
Are these proposals adequate to do
I
that?
think some of these are, but I think it has to go. I think it has to go further. Certainly, NATO has to be involved, and the only way to involve the allies behind our leadership is to say that we are prepared to act unilaterally. Once we do that, we can be sure they'll be with us. I think these proposals are some, but we need to also get the tribunal involved to ensure that serious markers are put down on war crimes, and we need to ensure that there is a conflict prevention force, a NATO observation mission in Kosovo itself, so that it is not just ringed around Serbia and then genocide could be allowed to take place within it, but that it is prevented within Serbia as well in Kosovo.
Do you believe, Mr. Fox, anything short of that may lead us to holding a hearing here, say in 5-6 years after lots of bloodshed, and trying to rally support for NATO peacekeeping forces to expand into that area?
I think that the fuse on this one is very short, that without an enhanced Christmas warning which backs a U.S.-led mediation or an interim settlement, we won't see much. We have a window now which is rapidly closing, may have already closed. And the cardinal error of this administration on Kosovo was to let go, to allow the Christmas warning to erode. It was really a reckless decision, one that needs, I think, much more examination. And there's certainly been a extremely active debate about it in the administration. Some of the positions that are reflected here today, I think, are well reflected within the administration. They're obviously not prevailing. If the U.S. is not prepared to match with that level of force the calculus of its national interest that was rendered by Brent Scowcroft, by the senior leadership of the Bush administration and the first Clinton administration, which certainly some very clear exponents of Clinton foreign policy have endorsed, then we're really in the soup. And we will see, surely, a much larger U.S. ground intervention later on to sort out the fighting outside of Kosovo. The problem with some of the measures that are being considered, even on the margins, are in fact to, I fear they would send another wrong signal of isolating Kosovo and respecting this issue as an internal matter. The Helsinki Accord should not be rewritten ad hoc by the U.S. of all countries. The Helsinki Accord is quite clear, as are other international covenants, that the territorial integrity and of a country, the respect for a territorial integrity of a country in Europe goes hand in hand with its adherence to European standards, and that would certainly mean no use of brutal force, certainly not ethnic cleansing against its minorities.
Congressman has raised the issue, the overlay of Russia's influence on Serbia or alliance with Serbia, and I wonder if you have a comment on that. What do you think? How does that impact the American action?
I think the refusal of the administration to take this to NATO has quite a bit to do with that fact. And in fact, I think some of our European allies are putting a higher priority on keeping Russia as part of a lowest common denominator diplomatic effort than they are to really facing up to the fundamentals here. Russia has not been friendly to peaceful outcomes in the Balkans and the southern Balkans. I think it would be better for the administration to question why Russia insists on collecting war criminals and pariahs as its clients at this late date, and why they can't find some other Serbs to ally themselves with. There's a difference between a pro-Serb policy and a pro-Serbs policy. There are a lot of Serbs, there are a lot of moderate Serbs. There's not just one Serb or one handful of Serbs. And I think a good deal could be done to remind Moscow of that. I think it would be more credible still if the U.S. Had a record of supporting democratic forces in the former Yugoslavia, which it decidedly does not. We tend to take it as it lays and then wonder why there's no Lech Walesa or Václav Havel.
Mr. Hooper, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think Milosevic has successfully tapped into the ultranationalist political tendencies in Russia and used these very effectively to build support for him, because there's no good democratic reason for Russia to support what he's doing. In fact, quite to the contrary. And I think it was against Yeltsin's democratic instincts in the beginning, but I think it shows how effective Milosevic has been. I certainly believe that the only way that peace and stability in the Balkans are not going to be safe and secure until there is democracy in Belgrade. That's the key. That's the bottom line. And the only way you get there from here is by setting the ground rules, which the U.S. would have to do a credible threat of force to ensure that this doesn't get any worse, and then start working back until we have the kind of government there that will check the kind of, I think, virulent ultranationalism that we've seen in Belgrade that produces what we've seen, not what we are seeing in Kosovo and what we've already seen in Croatia and Bosnia. Kosovo was implicit in what Milosevic did in Bosnia and Croatia. We are now just seeing it become explicit.
Thank you, gentlemen. Senator Biden.
Gentlemen, welcome again. As Mr. Hooper, Mr. Fox, remember, we've had discussions before, and I don't disagree with anything you've said about democracy in Belgrade is the ultimate requirement to have peace in the Balkans, and but it seems to me we have a little bit of a selective memory here. My recollection of the Christmas warning, which I happen to support, was that warning was given at the very time when the administration you wanted to leave, the Bush administration, refused to do anything about the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and when they were supporting, when the Secretary of State said there's nothing we can do, and when it was the easiest call to make because the least was happening. So I find this a little bit fascinating, the bashing that's going on right now, but I happen to share your ultimate view. As long as you all acknowledge that the previous administration created the circumstance that allowed all of this to take place. You all make it sound like there was this Bush administration that came along and stood firm and was there, and and while rape camps were set up, while tens of thousands of people were being massacred, while the proportions of the atrocities exceeded not in kind but in number by 50-fold what's going on here, and we stood by and said, don't move in Kosovo, but cross an international border, cross the Drina, take the whole JNA over there, go ahead and blow away everyone over there, no problem, no warning, nothing. Remember that part?
Senator, I think I want to assure you that if I can speak for Mr. Fox here with me, I think you're looking at the two people who were the most active dissidents.
And you're looking at the one person that was most active up here. That's
exactly.
why I mildly resent the way in which it's being
against the Bush
cast.
administration's
Right.
inaction.
Okay.
in those, when we were still in the State Department.
No, I remember. I just wanted to, set the record, set the stage here.
Senator, may I just say, I think that Christmas morning may be the only thing the Bush administration did right in the
Well,
Balkans.
cynical me thought it was done because the only one they wasn't going to have to exercise any force on at the time. But that's just, I've been here too long, mildly cynical, based on everything else that wasn't done.
Senator, just weighing in on that point, because I was a Republican congressman and very critical.
I always thought you were a Democrat. I'm joking.
I voted with you many
I don't want to
times.
do that. Yeah, I know. I'm joking. I'm joking.
But I would tell you that I was very critical of the Bush administration. In fact, in my testimony, which I didn't read because I gave it to the record, I cited an article 6 years ago by Patrick Glynn, Yugo Blunder, where he said the U.S. handling of the Yugoslav crisis is in fact a case study in how not to conduct foreign policy in the post-Cold War, World War, combining a lack of intellectual rigor, carelessness, with what then Senator, and let me give him a plug, Al Gore, termed moral obtuseness about the conflicts and issues at stake. The main factor in the Bush administration's mishandling of Yugoslavia was its devotion to geopolitical stability at the expense of democratic values and human rights.
Well, I don't want to refight the war, that political war, but I want to sort of set the stage here a little bit for about how not the atrocities that are occurring, but the circumstances are different. Doesn't necessarily bring about a result different than what you all are suggesting. But I want to make sure we know what we're talking about here, okay? That I know what I'm talking about. You all know what you're talking about. I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about, and I know what you're talking about. Now, this notion that the only solution now is to do something we're having trouble even maintaining people doing now. I don't know whether you remember, guys. We couldn't get anybody to do anything, including half the Democrats on Bosnia. Remember that part? Got that part, remember? And we are hanging on by our fingernails in terms of support for the maintenance of U.S. forces. There's a resolution introduced today by Senator Hutchison and Senator Byrd demanding and requiring, not a resolution, a piece of legislation, I haven't seen that, I was just told about by my staff, saying that American forces have to be drawn down to no more than 2,500 by the year 2001 or 2000. I mean, we're still fighting like hell just to keep. I mean, I'm on the floor or in the caucus or in a senator's office literally every week pleading the case, shuttling basically back to Bosnia to make the case progress is being made. And so the context in which this is all taking place now is not different. Well, it is different, but it is a totally changed circumstance. Now, here's what the proposals are you're suggesting. The suggestion is that, the only reason NATO's not moving or we're not moving on NATO is because of Russia. Well, the Italians and the Greeks own the telecommunications system there. You guys know all this. I don't know why you don't say it. The French are the French. You understand that part better than I do. And the Germans have been reluctant to move ever as it relates to anything having to do with Serbia. And so we talk about all we got to do is say, by the way, NATO, we're going, and they will follow. Well, you may be right. You may be right. But I'm not so sure that's right, number one. Number two, with regard to blaming the victims, I'm not blaming the victims. What I'm trying to get straight here is what this negotiation is supposed to be about and what we're demanding of Milosevic. It's real important, it seems to me, when we make a demand, we know what it is. And what is the demand? The demand, first and foremost, is stop the atrocities. Nobody disagrees with that. The second demand is, at a minimum, allow some autonomy. At a minimum. But at a maximum, what are we asking for? Should we impose I mean, you both said that this notion of negotiation and repeating the contact group involvement, all those is just replaying all the wasted years in Bosnia before we finally got to a point where at least the atrocities have stopped, if not ratification of the cleansing having occurred. But what is it? You had a chance as I have in the past. We'll probably never get it in again in light of my attitude toward the man. But what do you say to Milosevic? What is the bottom line we demand? Big nations can't bluff. What is the bottom line? I ask Mr. Hooper, Mr. Fox. I know what the bottom line is, but I'll ask you as well, Mr. Congressman, because, anyway, I'll ask you.
I think it's, you start off with autonomy, and you work through negotiations to autonomy plus. I think there's a variety of solutions. One might very well be Kosovo becoming a third republic in the federation with an equal level, equal to Serbia and Montenegro. I think that would be an acceptable outcome to the Kosovars. I believe that. I think it's also, there are other outcomes that are possible as well. The best single way to restore the loyalty of the Kosovar Albanians to the Serbian state, I believe, is through democracy in Belgrade. If you had that, our problems would be over. The kind of conflict prevention we're talking
As
about.
you and I know, we both know Belgrade well. We both know, I'm being presumptuous in suggesting I know it well as well. We both know it well. I've been searching for that democratic middle in Serbia for a whole hell of a long time. You want to give me any names? You want to give me any ideas? You talk about who to support. I've made visits. I've met with all of the dissidents. One of the most destabilizing, how can I say it? That's the wrong word.
And it's one of the reasons that I believe we have to reverse engineer this issue from the point of saying Strobe Talbot is right. Praise Strobe Talbot for his analysis. There are others in the administration who are right, who understand this every bit as well as anybody in this room, I would say. Doubtless better for what they know additionally. If we believe that it's an unacceptable outcome to have a fourth Balkan War that draws in first Macedonia, Albania, I happen, in fact, not to think that the cordon sanitaire makes any sense, to be honest. I think it's a marginal measure, and it's distracting, and it's impractical, and all the rest. But I would much rather invest in a post negotiation guarantee inside Kosovo. But if we believe that this is an unacceptable outcome, which I think we're all saying, and I think we do agree, and we certainly agree with you, then we must do the necessary measures to ensure that mediation takes place and we stop dancing around with closing bank accounts in Cyprus and we get to the heart of the matter. The U.S., I want to say it again, the U.S. under two administrations, and I think both administrations were serious about this and were considered about this, and certainly Belgrade took it seriously, and I think the Kosovo Albanians took it seriously, and the neighbors took it seriously. These two administrations made a calculation that that this was such a profound interest of the U.S., a vital national security interest, as Secretary Talbot says, that we were prepared to act unilaterally. No UN, no OSCE, no Europeans, no NATO. We were prepared to act unilaterally if necessary. That is the beginning of wisdom to get a baseline on Kosovo, to get a grip on the Kosovo crisis rapidly, and it has to start as ever in the Oval Office. And I think if that does not happen, and if it doesn't happen fairly quickly, there will be a disastrous legacy for this administration and for NATO that will really make Bosnia look like the warm-up, Bosnia pre-1995.
Mr. Fox, I think we're going to need to leave you with the last word on it. The purpose of calling this hearing was simply to focus the debate and get some minds to working. Part of the role of the U.S. Senate is advising, not just consenting. And hopefully we have the attention of our government and we can stimulate some resolve. So we thank you all for participating. And with that, we are adjourned.